The knock on my door wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud. It was controlled, deliberate, and somehow that made it worse. When I opened the door, 2 police officers stood on my porch, hands hovering near their belts, eyes already drifting past me into my house like they were assessing a scene before it unfolded. One of them said my name and asked if I lived alone. The other followed immediately, asking if there were any weapons inside. My stomach dropped before I even knew what I was being accused of. They explained that a neighbor had reported suspicious activity. According to her, I was dealing drugs out of my home. For a second, my brain stalled. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded impossible. I worked remotely. I barely interacted with anyone on the block. The most illegal thing I owned was probably an expired prescription bottle shoved in a bathroom drawer. But the officers didn't smile. They were calm, courteous, and very serious. As they walked me through the complaint, one name surfaced again and again: the HOA board member, the woman people avoided at block parties. Karen. I'd lived in that neighborhood nearly 3 years, and for the first month, she'd made it clear I wasn't welcome. It started small. Passive-aggressive notes taped to my door about trash cans being out too early. Emails criticizing how my car was parked. Comments about the curtains in my front windows. Every message ended with her full name and HOA title, like a signature stamp of authority over my life. At first, I tried to keep the peace. I smiled. I apologized. I adjusted things that didn't even violate the rules. It never mattered. Every interaction felt like she was digging, probing, hunting for something she could use. The moment I realized how far she might go came one afternoon in my driveway. I was unloading groceries when she marched over, pointed at a tub of protein powder in my trunk, and asked what I was really selling. I thought she was joking. She wasn't smiling. When I asked what she meant, she leaned in and whispered, "People like you always have a side hustle." I should have reported that. I didn't. I thought ignoring her would star the behavior. Instead, it fed it. The officers asked if they could step inside and talk. I agreed, hands trembling, mind racing through every innocent detail that could somehow be twisted into something suspicious. As they entered my living room, one officer asked if I'd noticed people coming and going late at night. I told him no, because no one did. I barely had visitors at all. That's when they explained the full allegation. The report claimed I was receiving frequent packages, acting nervous, and meeting unknown individuals. The caller said she feared for the neighborhood's safety and suspected drug distribution. She'd sounded confident, they said, detailed, genuinely concerned. I knew immediately who it was. Over the past few weeks, my mail had been strange. Late deliveries, bent envelopes, items marked delivered that never arrived, a utility bill that never showed up. I blamed the Postal Service. Standing there with police in my living room, a colder thought crept in and tightened my chest. What if this wasn't random anymore? As the officers looked around, one paused near my kitchen table, where several unopened envelopes sat neatly stacked. He asked if I'd been having mail issues. I nodded and explained. His expression shifted, not alarm, but focus, like something had just clicked. Then he asked a question that made my pulse jump. Did I know if any neighbor had access to other people's mail? I didn't answer right away. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a false accusation. It felt like the edge of something much bigger, something Karen might not be able to talk her way out of. And while I was still trying to process why police were in my house at all, I had no idea that what they were about to find wasn't in my home. It was in hers. They didn't arrest me. They didn't search my house. Instead, the officers exchanged a look that told me this call wasn't unfolding the way the caller intended. One stepped outside to make a call, while the other stayed with me, asking questions that no longer had anything to do with drugs. He asked about the HOA, prior complaints, whether anyone had threatened me. When I said her name, he nodded slowly, like it was the first time he'd heard it that day. That's when the tone changed. He told me carefully that this wasn't the first complaint they'd received from my neighbor. Not about me, about everyone. Cars parked too long. Packages arriving too often. People walking dogs at odd hours. None of it had gone anywhere. But this time, she'd pushed harder. She'd insisted. She'd framed it as urgent and specifically mentioned mail. While we were talking, the other officer returned. He leaned in and whispered to his partner. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to feel my heart race. Postal inspector. Garage. A lot of envelopes. They asked me to stay inside while they went next door. From my window, I watched them cross the lawn and knock on Karen's door. She answered immediately, perfectly dressed, clipboard in hand, like she'd rehearsed this moment. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw the confidence, the animated gestures, the way she pointed toward my house like she was presenting evidence. Then one officer asked to see her garage. Her body language shifted instantly. The smile tightened. She hesitated. She said something that made an officer raise an eyebrow. She laughed too loudly, waved it off, said the garage was a mess, irrelevant, that she had HOA authority and didn't need to comply with harassment while protecting the community. The officer didn't argue. The officer asked again. I watched her hesitate, shifting her weight, try to redirect the conversation, buying time. Finally, reluctantly, she stepped aside. When the garage door opened, I couldn't see every corner from my angle, but I didn't need to. I saw the officers freeze. One stepped carefully inside. The other reached for his radio. They didn't emerge immediately. Minutes ticked by. Karen's voice rose, sharp and defensive, words tumbling out faster than she could form them. Hands flew, shaking, gesturing wildly, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. One officer returned to the driveway. Phone pressed to his ear, eyes locked forward like he was holding himself in check. Then Karen noticed me watching. Our eyes met, and for the first time since I moved in, she didn't look smug or annoyed. She looked scared, furious, like she had just realized the spotlight she trained on me had snapped around and locked on her instead. Her shouting grew frantic. I couldn't make out the words entirely, but I heard my name repeated over and over. She gestured toward my house, then the officers, then back into the garage, insisting they were wasting time, that I was a real threat, that she was being punished for doing the right thing. The officers no longer paid attention. They were pulling things out. Stacks of envelopes, bundles of packages, overflowing mail trays, rubber-banded stacks, addresses that weren't hers. Some old, some recent, all seemingly intentional. Another police car pulled up, then another. Karen's voice cracked as she demanded an explanation. One officer finally turned to her with a calm, precise statement that froze her in place. This was no longer an HOA matter. Watching them remove armfuls of stolen mail from her garage, I felt a chill. She hadn't called the police to report me. She called because she was afraid they would uncover her secret. And no excuse would save her now. The moment the words postal inspection were said aloud, Karen changed. Like a switch flipped, indignant outrage vanished. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted between the officers, the growing pile of mail spilling onto the driveway, then back to the open garage, the very space that had betrayed her. An officer asked one simple question. Why did she have mail addressed to at least a dozen other households? She paused, then gave a careful, measured answer. She claimed she was safeguarding the mail, that neighbors were careless, that packages were being stolen, and she had taken upon herself, as a responsible HOA board member, to collect and protect them. The words sounded practiced, too polished. The officer pressed further. Why hadn't she informed the homeowners? Why were open envelopes mixed with sealed ones? Why were some items months old? Credit card offers, medical notices, legal documents, things no one casually stored in the garage. Her story started to crumble. She stammered that she'd been overwhelmed, that she intended to return everything, that she hadn't realized it was illegal, that her actions were for the neighborhood's safety and order. Then, piece by piece, the truth emerged. She admitted to monitoring residents, tracking deliveries, noting who was home and who wasn't. She presented it as normal. Her duty, when asked why she accused me of dealing drugs, she glanced at my house and said she needed a reason. She knew the police wouldn't take a simple male neighbor complaint seriously without a bigger threat. She admitted she panicked when residents began asking questions about missing mail. That's when she called the police on me, not out of suspicion, but as a diversion. The officers remained calm. They didn't argue. They simply told her to turn and comply. As they placed cuffs on her, Karen insisted she was a victim, that this was a misunderstanding, that the HOA would clear everything up, that she had authority. No one responded. Shortly after, a postal inspector arrived, photographing every envelope, every label, every bin pulled from the garage. Neighbors began to appear, the very ones she claimed to protect. I recognized addresses. Faces changed as the truth hit. One woman started crying over a medical envelope with her name. Karen wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. By the end of the night, the police apologized to me. The call should never have escalated the way it did, but they were glad it led to the discovery. False reporting would be added to her charges. Later, standing on my porch, looking at her empty garage, I realized something. For years, Karen had behind titles, rules, and fear. She weaponized concern to control others. The moment she felt exposed, she tried to destroy someone else's reputation to save herself. She failed. 2 days later, the HOA sent a careful email. Karen was no longer affiliated with the board, and law enforcement was handling an internal matter. No apology, no explanation. But I didn't need one. Every time I check my mailbox and find my mail where it belongs, I remember the loudest voices claiming to protect the community are sometimes the ones you need protection from.